Well, everyone, today is a special day. We get to talk about your mom's favorite iPhone, and that would actually be the iPhone 3GS. Now, I think I've covered every single iPhone this year besides this one, the 3G and the 2G, so I'm going to go ahead and knock those three out, hopefully within this week, and then move on with my life. And what's cool about the iPhone 3GS is that this was the first time we saw an S-series device, and like I've stated before, the iPhone 6S is probably one of my favorite phones, and I always felt like the S-series of devices were one of those subtle upgrade periods, but they offered so much value for those phones, and they were actually pretty big updates. And I believe at the time the S actually stood for speed, because at the time of its release, the iPhone 3GS was actually 2 times faster than its predecessor, so it's 2 times faster than the 3G. And I remember owning a 3GS like many years ago, and I bought it and the backlight was actually broken on it, so I always had to hold it under the light in order for it to work, kind of like a Game Boy Advance if you kind of think about it. And I was playing like Bloons Tower Defense and all those different games on it, and I definitely did like this phone. I think it was a really huge upgrade coming from an iPhone 3G, and obviously like it's not really worth it anymore. If you're planning on picking it up, I would highly recommend you not to do it. But it's still kind of cool to look back and see how this phone has aged and kind of see, everything about it. And on the front, I mean, you can obviously tell it still has that similar design, the familiar design that we all pretty much know, that 3.5-inch display. It is a TFT panel, which is surprising, and the resolution, believe it or not, is 320 by 480 pixels. Now that is insane. Now to give you some perspective, that Samsung Galaxy Z Flip that I just talked about and everything, I dropped a couple bands on it. That one has a 1.1-inch display on it, but that is a 112 by 300 pixels, and that was something that I never really even used. And now there's not a lot of similarity. I thought there was going to be more of a similarity there, but it's still kind of weird to think that out, you know what I mean? Maybe, did that flop? I don't know. But obviously there's still a lot of bezel on it as well on that home button. But I think, especially with the next iteration, the iPhone 4, that was probably the biggest upgrade we've seen coming from one iPhone to the other. But this one still wasn't really that bad. And I think the actual performance and software of this phone was actually much better. And I don't think a lot of people really talk about that anymore, probably because nobody owns this phone anymore. But that is actually really weird that, I think a phone like this actually brought one of the better software supports, especially for a phone like this, because it got software support for quite a bit of time, at least for an older iPhone standpoint. Now looking on the bottom, you can see we have that 30-pin connector, the standard one that everyone really complained about. And then on the back we have a single camera setup, and that really pretty much covers it up on the outside. There's really not much more to hit on here. And the software is one of those things that I really did want to hit on. This thing actually started off with iOS 3, and it did get the final versions of iOS 6, so it got up to iOS 6.1.6, and that's kind of weird because if you think about it, iOS 7 was that really big redesign, and this phone stopped right before then. So if you think about it, this phone could have potentially been one of the biggest flops in Apple history if it just got one more version of software, because as we know, iOS 7 was a very weird OS. I think it definitely was, I think it was an important one because that kind of changed the way everything looked, but it bricked a lot of people's devices, and I'll be honest, that is a huge thing to consider. You don't want to buy a phone and then have it bricked by its software. So what I can tell you about the software wise is that it's really good that it stopped at iOS 6, but the sad thing is a lot of apps are not supported with iOS 6 anymore, and there's still some ways to circumvent it. I did a video on how to do it, and it's kind of hit or miss, it doesn't really work every time, but I was able to get some apps installed on it, so I guess that's a really good thing. But in terms of software, completely outdated. So now moving on to the performance side of things, this thing had a weird numbered CPU, a 600 megahertz Cortex A8 chip, I guess, whatever that is, and it had a couple different models. It had 3 different models, the 8, 16, 32 gig models, and they all had 256 megabytes of RAM. And even saying that now in 2020 is insane. The fact that this phone had a small amount of RAM like that is crazy. And I think, of course, like, there's nothing we can do about it now. And at that time, though, like, if you think about it, that's really all they needed. They only needed that much RAM to power all those apps. And that's crazy to think about nowadays. I mean, we have phones that have like 20 gigabytes of RAM nowadays. And the fact that this thing had like that small amount of RAM is insane, and I think that really goes to show how well this iPhone 3GS and how crazy that market was at the time, you know what I mean? So I'll definitely tell you, in terms of performance, it's not a good performing phone right now. I mean, obviously it's kind of expected, but it's not as bad as you might think, and it's even smooth now, which is pretty weird, especially looking at phones like, I've played with the iPhone 4 a lot, I've played with the iPhone 4S a lot, and different phones like that, and I think this one has probably held up better in the long term than those ones have, even though those ones were bigger upgrades. So it's weird how that works. works, but that kind of covers up that. Now, hitting on the camera, you guys might be surprised to hear this, but weirdly enough, it has a single 3.15 megapixel camera lens. I've never seen like that before. I've seen like 12.3 or something like that, but never 3.15. But it has that. You can shoot 480p video on it, and I think the camera is actually not that horrible, but it kind of depends because, you know, obviously it's not the best thing ever, but it gets the job done, I guess. If you're in a pinch and you need a photo of a super grainy photo, it's kind of like a webcam, you know what I mean? Like when you take a webcam video on your Mac or whatever, it kind of looks like that in a way. So not super high quality, but I guess it'll get the job done if you're into it. So that really pretty much covers it up in terms of the camera. There's really not much to hit on this phone because it's kind of old. Now, funny enough, it doesn't give me the size of the battery, but what I can tell you is that the battery actually wasn't too bad on it. When I would charge it at the time of me owning it, I would probably get, you know, several days out of it, but I wasn't using it as a main phone. I was using it kind of like an iPod. So at that time, but I was still using it pretty extensively. But at that time, I was able to get a bit of time out of it. So I don't think it was the end of the world, but I do think the battery life was actually pretty decent on this device at the time. But I want to hear your guys' opinion on it. I never grew up with it, but maybe you guys have. So if you guys actually use it as a phone, I'd love to hear your take on, you know, whether the battery life was good or not. So to kind of answer the question, should you pick up an iPhone 3GS in 2020? I will say without a doubt, absolutely not. I mean, I would not recommend using it. I think you guys already know that. However, should you pick it up as a collector's item? In that case, I will say 100% yes. I would 100% recommend picking up an iPhone 3GS as a collector's item. I think it's really cool, and to kind of see the history of Apple and to see the history of the iPhones. This one really combines, you know, the future of iOS and the, you know, back end of iPhones, because it has the older design as the iPhone, even the first one kind of, but it had that newer software support. So you kind of see, you know, what the best version of software that iOS ever put out based on what everybody says actually felt like on a phone. And all you would have to do at that point is just get an iPhone 3GS updated to the latest version and just go from there. So that really pretty much covers it up there. If you want to pick up the iPhone 3GS, obviously I don't have any links to go get it anywhere, but you can probably find it on eBay or something like that. But that pretty much covers it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys could check it out. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.